not going to. I'll
Told you
watch
not to.
after.
We're
I'll
live.
check
We're
the.
live. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our last debate session of this whole election period. This is probably the biggest one that everyone has been waiting for. So, without further ado, let me just jump straight into the introduction. This is the debate for the presidential position. Our current office bearer is Dominic Lee, and we also have one candidate from Ignovitus, and his name is Ali Rashwan Mohammed. Just a bit of a quick self-introduction. My name is Sean Pan. I am the returning officer for this year's annual election. With me, I also have my deputy returning officer, Alethea Goh. However, she is behind the scenes making sure the stream runs smoothly and not able to show her face right now. Just a bit of a funny story. Actually, all of us are wearing green color. Dominic was not wearing green, so I made him change. Okay, so we have a few audience reminders. Keep comments respectful. I believe that I will have to emphasize this quite a bit. I really urge you guys to keep your comments civil. Bad comments reflect badly on you and also the party that you support. So it's a bit counterproductive if you are trying to do them a favor. And again, just because you are not a candidate does not mean that you are not a Monash student, and your actions may still have consequences if they get too severe. Okay, but regardless, you are still more than welcome to drop any questions you have towards Rush 1 in the comment section, and we will get to them in the middle of the debates. So let's move on to talking about the agenda so that everyone knows what we're going to do today. First, we have the introduction by Election Commission, which is what I'm doing now. After I introduce the itinerary, we'll move on to the opening statement by Ali Rashwan. Rashwan is going to talk about his manifesto and policies in this time frame. After that, we will have Q&A by Dominic. We do not have other candidates for Rashwan to go against, so we will skip the cross-examination period. After the Q&A by Dominic Lee, our current office bearer, we will have the Q&A by audience, where I will be presenting your questions towards Rashwan, and he will be given the chance to address them. Now, after that is done, we will finally have our closing statements by Rashwan, and we will finally close by yours truly, the Election Commission, or me. So without further ado, let's move on to the opening statement. Rashwan, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Sean. So first of all, good evening to Sean, Alethea, other members of the Election Commission, and current Musa President Dom. Most importantly, good evening to the audience members. So my name is Rashwan, and I'm a Year 2 Sem 2 student who wants to run for the position of Musa President for the year 2023. Now, before I go on to my manifesto, let me tell you a bit more about my experience in Musa. So I first joined Musa as a subcommittee member in MUIS activities. This was an extremely good experience for me because I was able to see Musa in the eyes of a subcommittee member. However, I was left wanting to do more, so I ran for the position of head of MUIS for the year 2022. And it was in this position that I actually started to understand the inner workings of Musa a lot better. Not only was I focused on running my division, but I also put an emphasis on maintaining close working relationships with my peers. Because of this, I was able to understand the importance of every single department of Musa when it comes to serving the students better. Now, my year of Musa, which is 2022, was a year that had transitioned from online and virtual events to offline and on-campus events. This was a huge challenge, and as a division head, I was able to firsthand experience these challenges, and I was also able to witness the challenges that my fellow OBs faced during this transition phase. However, because of the hard work and dedication that they had, they were able to successfully transition to on-campus. But I was left thinking that Musa could be doing so much better. To say this, I'm not discrediting the amazing work that Musa 2022 had put in. In many ways, I do think that Musa 2022 will serve as a generation of trailblazers for the future generations of Musa to come. Now let me move on to my manifesto. My first point is broaden our horizons with more external collaborations. I do this I say this in terms of collaborating with external parties such as student organizations, NGOs, and other relevant organizations for Musa. I believe that by collaborating with other student organizations from other universities, we are able to create events with a much more diverse demographic. Our students would be able to interact with students from the other university as well, thus creating a more diverse and enriching environment. Furthermore, for Musa, by working closely with other student organizations, we're able to learn their structures and procedures better. Getting a better understanding on these structures and procedures that have been proven to work for other organizations will allow us to learn from them. Maybe we can adapt parts of their systems and procedures to ourselves if relevant. And we could also show them a thing or two about how to run a student organization. Secondly, by working with NGOs with the help of our volunteer MUVP, we're able to make sure that our students can take part in work in which they are passionate about, whilst also making sure that they're instilled with values and skills that will make them better students in the future. Now, my second manifesto point talks about a more united Musa. Now, to say this, I'm not saying that Musa 2022 is not united in any sense. However, I believe that because of the pandemic and the transition from online to offline, they were not able to have as many bonding activities and events as they must have had. I believe that by having more bonding activities and events, we can create a work culture whereby our office bearers can actually thrive. I believe that with a healthier work environment, we can create one in which office bearers know how to give and receive criticism in a healthy manner. Through this, I think we can bring forth much better collaborations for our students to actually enjoy. Now, my next manifesto point focuses on building upon the foundations that have been left for us. With this, I'm not saying that all things don't need to be changed, because there are some things that need to be changed and improved. However, it is so common for office bearers to come into office and simply change things for the sake of changing. I believe that when we do this, we're wasting important time that we could actually utilize better to understand the students and to serve them. So again, I state that things that need to be improved must be improved. However, they should not be done simply for the sake of bringing change. Now, my last manifesto point revolves around accountability. I believe that by my second manifesto point about having a united Musa, we can create an environment whereby office bearers can hold each other accountable. Furthermore, by making sure that they know how to give and receive criticism in a healthy manner, we can also make sure that they can give and receive accountability in a good manner. I also believe that there's an important emphasis on office bearers holding themselves accountable. I believe that with a better understanding of the Constitution and the handbook, they can actually hold themselves accountable moving forward. Now, with this, I would like to pass it back to Sean.
Thank you, Rashwan, again for your opening statement. Now, we do not have any other candidates for you to cross-examine, so we can jump straight into our Q&A session with our office bearer. Dom, the floor is yours.
Okay, hi everyone, to the audience as Rashwan and also to our election commission. Welcome to our final debate of the year. First, I'd like to say congratulations to Rashwan for making it this far with your party. It definitely has not been easy. Since it's your second time running, I've got a lot of questions for you. I'll just get straight to the point because I'm sure that the audience is also dying to ask you questions. First question, can you tell us what preparations you have made for both Musa and your academics to overcome the challenges posed by this huge responsibility?
So thank you so much for the question. So currently I'm also an office bearer, so I understand the struggles in terms of balancing your work as a Monash student and also as an office bearer. So at the moment, I still have my responsibilities as an office bearer. I also have my university responsibilities, and I'm also party leader for Ignivitas. This has given me a situation whereby I need to be really good in terms of time management. So as preparations, I believe that I should start by making sure that I understand the boundaries that I need to set for myself. I do need to prioritize Musa work, but I also do need to prioritize my own academics. So to do this hand in hand, I believe that a strict schedule must be followed, and it must also account for the sense that when you become president, there will be unforeseen circumstances that will require attention. So I believe that by making sure that my academic work is done as soon as it can be done, I can have more time to focus on my Musa responsibilities. I hope that answers your question.
Yep, that answers the question. Let's move on to the second question. Knowing that you are a current head of a division within Musa, can you elaborate further on the experiences that have prepared you for the president's role? And can you also elaborate on the differences between running a division and running Musa?
So currently I'm the head of MUIS, and although it's a head of a division, there are some major differences between being the head of a division and being the president of Musa. So as a head of division, some skills that I do think I could transfer to this position is leading a team. Although it is a slightly smaller team, it is also a very diverse team. And we also do have to liaise with external parties and make sure we can stay professional throughout. I've also learned extreme time management skills and also conflict resolution skills that I believe we can transfer to the position as a president. Now, in terms of some things I think will be different is, firstly, the team that I am leading will be much larger. There will be much more personalities. And this time, if I do get elected as president, I know that many of the positions will be taken up by people from other parties and maybe also independent candidates. So because of this, I am expecting some challenges in terms of conflicts. And I believe by my second manifesto point, creating a more united Musa, we'll be able to get rid of these conflicts and make sure that the environment for OBs in 2023 is healthy and one in which they can thrive in.
Okay, that's a very interesting answer. I think that one thing you need to consider as well, I think I've mentioned this a couple of times, seeing that you are an existing office bearer already, is that something to consider when uh, considering issues with Musa, right? Running a division is something that's not easy to do. It requires a micro perspective on things. You will need to be on hand with everything that's going on within your department. For Musa, you also need to take a look at the big picture as well, because your actions and the actions of your departments and divisions under your watch do not just affect one another within Musa as well, they also affect the staff, the community, and the wider student body as well. So one thing to consider is please also do consider the macro perspective. Not everything can be done via micro perspective.
Thank
Okay,
you so much.
all right. Moving on to the next question. Based on your manifesto, you mentioned that you wanted to emphasize on unity within Musa. Can you elaborate what you mean by that, and what will you be doing differently for Musa 2022?
So by unity within Musa, it's quite straightforward. A united Musa is a stronger Musa. So as compared to Musa 2022, which had the first semester online and also had an extreme transition phase whereby all of the office bearers were so busy to make sure that their own departments could successfully and stably transfer back to on campus. I'd say because of this, they weren't really able to interact with other office bearers too much. We weren't really able to have as many bonding events and activities as we wanted to at the start because of unforeseen circumstances. So I do think that one of the things we'll be doing different is definitely more bonding activities and more events. And another thing, this also delves more into participation for events. So I think that when it comes to smaller events that Musa has, and by smaller events, I mean events in which we have low participation. It would be a great idea to encourage office bearers that aren't directly involved in the executing or planning of those events to actually attend those events. Because not only does this increase participation, this also gives an opportunity for students to get to know Musa better, but it also gives a great opportunity for Musa office bearers to interact with one another and get to know each other better. So because of this, I think Musa can be more united and bring forth much better collaborative events for the students to enjoy. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, that's a very interesting perspective. I think it's a good idea. One thing to note that it might be a bit ambitious as well. What I want to ask is, how would you encourage office bearers actually to join these events outside of their interest? For example, if it's an international student related event, right? International students, of course, will participate. Local students, not so much. How do you plan to encourage participation from office bearers and their teams as well to these events? Uh, Looking at the tight time frame as well, because the main responsibilities of a student is to study, and there are specific time allocation as well, because time management is key here, right? So yeah,
Mhm.
here's my question.
So I do think that raises a very important point in terms of making events that are targeted to a specific demographic seem appealing to the other demographic. The example you used, for example, events that are catered for international students. A lot of local students usually don't attend these events, and I think they're actually losing a great opportunity. So when it comes to events with international students, they aren't specifically just catered to international students, because when a local student attends that event, they're able to immerse themselves in the diverse cultures that are being displayed in these events. So I think a good way is to make sure that the other people that you want to encourage to attend the event can also perceive the event in not just the way it's catered, but the benefits that these students could have by attending these events. And to make events more accessible for people to participate, which is a very important point because as a Monash student, your schedule is very, very packed. I believe by having more events that take place in common areas on campus would be a great way to solve this issue. Because let's say we had a bunch of bazaars this semester, and students love the bazaars. For events and initiatives such as bazaars that are in the common areas, students don't necessarily have to make too much time to attend these events. They could simply be walking from one place on campus to another place on campus and still be exposed to these events. So I do understand that not all students can attend all events given to time constraints, but I do want to put an emphasis on having events and initiatives that all students can enjoy to some extent.
Okay, that sounds very promising. I'll be looking forward to see what happens next year if you do get elected. Moving on to the next question. My question for you will be, what initiatives does the President's Department have that plan to benefit the students next year? Uh, take into consideration this part. In response to a question from Gurion, the 2021 Musa president, you answered that you will focus on collaborating with external partners for initiatives that can benefit the student community. Do you have any existing organizations that you have in mind, and what are the possible collaborations you can do?
So Musa 2022 had this collaborative, not necessarily for the students, it was more so an event between the student councils with Taylor's University called Uni Link Up. It was a great platform for us to get to know these people better. And I think it can serve as a foundation for a relationship that we can build upon, especially considering the fact that Taylor's is in close vicinity to us alongside Sunway. I haven't directly worked with Sunway before, but I think that's also something we can work towards. In terms of specific organizations, I think it's important that we target related organizations and also ones that are closer to us in terms of vicinity. In the case that if we plan to have physical events, which we do, students would actually be able to attend those events because we're located quite close by. And in terms of benefits for students, I think this can be in multiple forms. For example, the more diverse environments in which they can interact with other students, and also building upon these relationships that we have with other universities, because sometimes they do have resources that Monash does not have. So in terms of workshops that they can hold and stuff like that, we can encourage our students to actually attend these workshops which might not be available in Monash itself. A great example would be as a club member myself this year, I attended a couple acting and speaking workshops in Taylor's. This helped me get a better concept of my art, and I was able to learn so much. But Monash itself didn't offer any such workshops. So by building a better relationship with other universities, I believe we can raise awareness for workshops that they have, which our students can also access, furthermore benefiting them for their lives. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, yeah, that answers the question. But what I want to also stress on is that outside of other student councils, some organizations that you might want to look at collaborating with are MSGA, HEYA, Graduan, Talent Bank, and Financial Literacy for Youth, or FLY. These what you're looking at is a lot of student council organizations. What I propose you also look at the organizations that are separate from universities, whose purpose is something that is outside of like academics, more so towards education. For example, Financial Literacy for Youth, FLY, they are very focused on educating youth with financial literacy advice, which is quite sorely needed in this time. Okay.
Yeah, these
Another thing.
organizations, I did want to consult with you in case I get elected to actually work further with these organizations. So I did have this in mind as well, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Okay, very good. I'll be waiting for that. In addition, right, I think there's an additional component I'm not sure whether you considered. You should definitely consider increasing communication with MSA and Monsu, our Australian counterparts to Musa. That's something that I did not really have a chance to do so this semester. But nevertheless, it's something important for you to consider because while you're considering in the local Malaysian context, it is important, yes, but it is also important to touch base with our so-called mother chapter in Australia because that's where the real authority is. If there's anything at all, then we can consult them. Okay, moving on, following up to that, I wanted to ask, besides that, right, collaborating with other universities and organizations to plan programs for students, what other initiatives do you have planned to address issues faced by students?
So, in terms of direct initiatives to address issues faced by students, I think not only do we not have to necessarily make manifesto points about addressing these issues, because when you become president, you're basically expected to address these issues. So, I think that this is something that falls into my job scope, and it's something that we have to look for in a case by case basis in regards to the issues faced by students. When it comes to welfare issues, I need to make sure that the welfare department is aware of this. If it's, let's say, a student that is suffering issues financially and they struggle to pay their fees, I can make sure to contact the management teams that are relevant and make sure that the student knows that there are ways in which the university can accommodate for them. So a huge part of part of this would be to look at things on a case by case basis because despite not having direct initiatives that cater to these needs, I think it's really important to acknowledge the fact that the president does have resources that can address these issues. So, on a case by case basis, I would try to understand the issues and then look at the resources that I have available to solve these issues.
Okay, that's a very good answer. In addition to whatever you've mentioned just now, what I want to feedback is that when it comes to reacting, when I stress on the word reacting to situations that the student population is facing, right? It is impossible for the president to be at the beck and call of every single situation. So your job as president would be to delegate situations to the relevant departments that can handle things. What I would suggest you also to consider is to set up a system to receive and process to the complaints that is integrated with existing forms of feedback collection that is used by these university authorities. And especially, this is something for you to discuss with the next Musa 2023 Executive Committee. This part is something that the president cannot do alone. We've already experienced it before. And if you do not have proper communication and close collaboration with your team, this is something that is bound to fail from the start.
Thank you so
Okay.
much. I understand that.
All right, moving on, doing well so far. You mentioned earlier about foundation being the basis for your decision on which areas to improve or not. How do you determine what areas of improvement to make? How would you go about improving the processes that seem like they need improvement? Okay, I'll just ask that first.
So, in terms of going about improvements that we should make to Musa, I think very first thing before you make a change or improvement is to understand why the current system is the way it is and consult with the office bearers from the past years that have utilized the system and what they felt about it. Because a lot of the times, even if you want to change something and even if you think it could benefit you, there might not necessarily be a sustainable way to bring forth the change. So, in terms of bringing the change, I think we need to approach it in a completely objective perspective. Much rather than me wanting to implement my ideas, I need to look at it objectively and see which ideas are actually beneficial for the students. So I must consult with not only my team, but I should also consult with HAC, which would have members that have a lot of knowledge about these procedures. So approach them in an objective manner and consult the relevant parties before I jump to any conclusions.
Okay, that sounds like a solid approach. So what I wanted to ask actually follows up to your response from that. How would you go about this change if the processes are not just within Musa, but also involve processes from higher ups, meaning, for example, management? This one is
Okay.
an important question to ask because from this debates, this series of debates, it seems that a lot of students, sorry, not students, candidates may or may not understand the complexity of processes within Musa and the university itself. So this is a very important question that I would like to see answered.
So currently being inside Musa, I realized that there are a lot of things that people want to change. However, it's not necessarily change we can implement through Musa itself. It requires change from other departments of Monash as well. So when it comes to things like this, which we want to change, it's really important to make sure that you understand the other party because a lot of the times we have this idea that student life isn't doing something that's good for us. It's really important to understand that they also do want to do what's good for us. However, when it comes to situations, it's simply out of their hands as well. There are also systems in which by we simply can't change it given the capabilities and the resources that we have, such as making our finance tracker faster. Because of the systems that we have, we simply can't make it any faster. However, what we can do is make sure that the work that we do as Musa in regards to these procedures are efficient because let's say an example the finance situation, I'd say that a lot of the delays that occur can actually be reduced by us by making sure the work on our end is efficient. It's not to say that we blame ourselves for these incidents, but it's more so to say that office bearers do have a harder time understanding the procedures that finance does have. So a clear understanding would definitely speed up the process on our end when it comes to approaching other parties and improvements that they can bring, it's really important to compile the data that we have. For example, this time we had a lot of students who wanted a lot of things to change. So I do think we can consult with them and try to understand from them why they can't change something, or maybe we can even work hand in hand with them to bring forth the change that is needed. I'd say the key is to consult the relevant parties and also understand them as to why the procedure is the way it is right now.
Okay, that's a good answer. But just take in mind that while you did mention a lot of valid points, it is hard actually to get a hold of management and to get them to sit down and discuss with you about the problems you face. Not least because it's not because they don't want to talk to us, but more so because they are busy running their job, just like how we are trying to do our job in Musa. And in a lot of cases, the way that things run do not align. So just take that into note for the future. Uh, any response to that question, or shall I move on?
Yeah, I do think that's really important to understand that these are also busy people who will not be there the very second you call for them because they also have jobs that they need to do just like us. So I'd say to start my term, if I do get elected, establish good working relationships with relevant members of staff because that is something I think is really important to have good and healthy professional working relationships with the relevant staff members so that efficient communication can take place. So I do understand that staff won't be available as soon as we want them. So that's also something we need to account. I'd say taking that knowledge into account now, before we do approach any staff members to get help on procedures that could be improved, first we need to ensure that internally we are doing everything to make sure that that procedure can be improved. So in that way, we don't simply just meet with the staff member and they suggest that, hey, Musa could be doing this instead. And then we have to do the change and then reach out to them again. So make sure we do everything we can before we reach out to them and have healthy relationships with the staff members.
Okay, I'll move on to the next question. Just this is in your opinion, right? May I ask what do you think is the root cause between all the misunderstandings between the students and Musa?
I think the root cause between the misunderstandings between Musa and the students is mainly miscommunication and misinformation, and also the fact that a lot of students would rather hear what other students think of Musa than actually try to figure out what Musa is on their own. I do understand that there are a lot of students that are unhappy with Musa and the way we've been performing, which is completely valid because we are to serve the students. We must take that feedback and improve. So I think by having a much more direct approach and actually giving an idea of what Musa is to the students, we can help clear up those misunderstandings that we do have. I do think it's also important for Musa to address feedback that we receive from the student body.
Okay, that's a comprehensive response. You addressed most of the points, but I think you forgot one of the most important points, which is actually skewed expectations between what the students expect, what Musa can provide, and also what the university can provide. So, following up on that, what is your plan and how do you intend to reconcile expectations between students, Musa as the middleman, and management and staff of the university?
So I think the answer to that question sort of comes from the question itself. Musa is the middleman inherently. So when it comes to things that Musa can and cannot do, we need to make sure that students understand what our job scope actually is. A lot of the time, students have expectations of Musa that we simply can't reach because of issues such as not being in our job scope or it being out of our budget. So I'd say look at it from a case by case basis, understand what are the expectations that students have that we cannot reach, and try to communicate to them why we simply cannot do what they are expecting us to do. And when we approach responding to these things, we need to make sure we respond in a professional manner and we actually do answer that question rather than just saying, oh, we can't do this. We need to explain to them why that is not possible for us. So I think this would definitely help students have a better understanding of what Musa can and cannot do. Again, the key to this would be to actually reach out to the students and answer their concerns.
Okay, moving on to the next question. So there are many office bearers in Musa. There's 52 currently, and about 200 something subcommittees, right? How do you plan to communicate closely and clearly with all the respective divisions and departments, and how would you prevent miscommunication?
I think a huge part of making sure that I can communicate properly with all of the members of Musa is to make sure that I actually trust my colleagues because When it comes to subcommittee members, they usually look to the department heads for information. They look for them to basically understand more of that job. Because a lot of the times, the way information is relayed is the Musa president could inform the rest of the Musa office bearers, who would then inform the subcommittee members. So to make sure that proper information is relayed, I need to ensure that we are using the right channels. It's really easy for us to use a lot of different group chats, and we can. The thing is, Musa will become friends, so we often use this group chats to even talk to each other. But it's really important to maintain one chat whereby we are only professional and strictly talk about work-related things. This way, these messages don't get lost in the chats. So I believe by having efficient communication channels and also communicating with the office bearers, as in regards to my second manifesto point about a united Musa, they also need to understand that a united Musa is one in which subcoms also feel like they belong. So not only does my second manifesto point apply to office bearers, it also applies to the subcommittee members, because the same holistic approach should be adopted by OBs in regards to their subcoms as well.
Okay, following up on that answer, may I ask how you would prefer to communicate with the relevant departments and divisions with regards to the different priorities that Musa has?
Communicate how, as in which platforms I plan to use?
How like you've seen how we do things this year. How do you plan to communicate information to the various priority areas? For example, anything related to welfare issues, anything related to academic issues, anything relating to PR or crisis. How would you address those issues?
Hmm. So I think we first need to understand which parties are related to the issue. Like you said before, if it's a PR related issue, I need to consult with the publicity officers and anybody else involved in the issue to make sure that we do have the right approach to addressing these issues and making sure there is no PR crisis. When it's an education related issue, I have to make sure that I contact the VPs who will be part of the Education Affairs Committee. So that committee can also make place for a place of discussion. When it comes to welfare, we have Musa Welfare, and we also have the Welfare Affairs Committee. So utilizing these different channels and committees that Musa has would be the way to address these issues. Because when it comes to specific issues that specific parties are related to, it's more efficient to actually communicate directly with these parties than the whole of Musa. Because the point of having all of these committees and departments is to address specific issues efficiently.
Okay, yeah, you answered that question very well. What I would also urge you to do is you should discuss with your GenSec, especially as well as your executive committee or executive committee, whichever you will, to decide as well how you plan to disseminate information to not just the office bearers but also the entire Musa and also to the university. So that once you have that down, it will be a much easier task to handle. Outside of communicating information to students, that one will always be a hard issue to tackle. Uh, shall I move on to the next question?
Of course.
Okay. Speaking of crises, in Musa, there will always be at least one crisis per year. Can you elaborate on what the role of the president is for crisis management and the steps needed to resolve crises with an example?
So this is something that we need to approach objectively. In the case that is a crisis and it needs to be addressed, as the spokesperson for Musa, I do need to make a statement to the student population. In the case where an apology is required, I must make that apology as well. Now, when it comes to the specific issue itself, I will first consult with my executive members and make sure that we are on the same page in terms of our approach. Then I would discuss with the rest of my office bearers and also communicate to them what sort of behavior and composure is expected of them during this period, especially on social media, because it's really easy to hop on your phone and say something about anything and post it. But when people do view it and people know that you are an office bearer of Musa, this does also reflect the image that Musa has. So in these sort of situations, there needs to be clearly communicated expectations to the office bearers in terms of how they should carry themselves throughout the whole situation. So that is how I would approach solving one of these issues.
Okay, you've addressed the issue relatively well with regards to the behavior of office bearers of PR crises. However, I think what you should also be stressing on is also that the president will always be, or almost always, will be the first responder and coordinator, and will always liaise with the relevant Musa departments or staff and student support for any major issues that may crop up. In relation to your answer earlier about the various committees, a good way to answer things is through those committees to reach the relevant issues. For example, if you're talking about a welfare issue, it should not just be directed to your executive committee, it should also be directed to your welfare affairs committee. In that vein, I also recommend that the executive committee also be a part of the various committees, because if you want to put down any swift actions that will need to be done, uh, if you recall as well, I showed you a framework before from a session before. Remember, I was talking about the discovery phase. The discovery phase is when you find out everything about the situation and also what actions you can take, while the execution phase is how you choose to execute which actions you think are best for the organization. And don't forget to also take the feedback phase, because the feedback phase is arguably the most important and hardest to achieve, by getting information from the student body exactly what it is, how and effective was it. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing we have about 4 more minutes, I'll ask you a couple more questions. You mentioned accountability in your manifesto. How will you hold Musa office bearers, subcom clubs, and societies accountable for their actions?
So, to answer this question, I will not be the only one holding them accountable. In terms of my manifesto's second point, I plan to create a united Musa that can hold each other accountable. So, I believe that to fully hold the team members accountable, it cannot just be for me. We need a Musa which has office bearers who are willing to hold our own members accountable. Furthermore, by making sure that they actually understand the handbook and the constitution and don't simply just read through it, we can make sure that office bearers themselves understand what is expected from them and actually hold themselves accountable. So it wouldn't simply be me doing the job, it would be me along with all of the other office bearers in regards to each other and also themselves.
Okay, that's a good answer. I think what you also should stress on is that's what your executive committee is for. As president, your role is to oversee your operations of Musa, but the executive committee is also there to assist you. The president is the biggest pillar of Musa, but the vice president and the GenSec, vice president and the treasurers are also both pillars of Musa, which the GenSec is the glue that holds all of Musa together, especially the office bearers. Um, what I want to follow up from that question is, how would you prevent any form of bias from clouding your judgment when you're presiding over cases like these?
So I would say it's really important as a president to make sure that I can put the boundaries in terms of work and also my friends. Because it is no doubt that when you are in Musa, you're going to develop relationships and you're going to be really close friends with many people because of the environment you're in. However, as office bearers, we need to understand that we need to be able to separate work and life. When I'm president, I'm not just anybody's friend, I'm the president of Musa. I do my job seriously and I hold others accountable. I see them as office bearers, not as my friends. But when I'm in life, I'm Rashwan and these are my friends. However, I draw that clear distinction. So that distinction is how I will make sure I will not have any bias when approaching these sorts of problems.
Okay, that's a very good distinction to make between work and personal issues. Echoing a question I asked Uruj, what would you do in a scenario where you have to make an unpopular decision, but the actions of the office bearers are against the regulations? How would you also deal with office bearers who overstep their boundaries but have not yet broken the rules?
So to answer the first part of your question, this is in regards to an office bearer who has went against the regulations and rules, right?
Correct. So the office bearer went against the rules and regulations, but the majority
Or
of the
my
office
decision
bearers
would
are,
be unpopular. All right.
yes, your
So
decision will be
I'd say
unpopular
the
regarding the
very
corrective action.
Okay. So I'd say the very fact that they have violated the rules and regulations does make it so that I do need to take steps against that, regardless of the fact that the other office bearers agree with me or not. This is because when we look at the rules and regulations, they are quite clear, and a violation of that, regardless of what other people think or not, is something that needs to be addressed and something in which I do have to take steps against. Now, second part of that question revolved around somebody who is not going against the regulations or the rules, but is doing something that other OBs don't like? Was that the question?
Your decision might not be very popular with office bearers. For example, in a very extreme scenario where you had to vote of no confidence in office bearer who breached the tree warning letter, but the
Mm,
office bearer is also necessary for the continuity of peace in Musa.
Hmm. Okay, so for specific cases like that, I think we need to analyze which is more important. Let's say, does the office bearer show any sort of remorse for their actions? Because if they are extremely important to the functioning of Musa, getting rid of them could actually pose more problems for us than solutions. Whereas on the other hand, if they do not show any remorse, and regardless of the fact that they're super important to Musa or not, if they continue to do these violations, we also do need to address that. So that's something that I'll be looking on objectively as a case by case basis sort of thing. Now, the second part of that question basically revolved around an office bearer who is not violating the rules or regulations, but is unpopular with the other OBs because of something they've done.
No, the office bearer overstepped their boundaries but have not
Oh,
broken the rules. So when I say overstep their boundaries, meaning what is not against the rules but is against something for such as ethics.
hmm. So I would say even if you aren't breaking the rules or regulations, when you overstep boundaries, we do need to have a conversation. Because although you aren't breaking the rules or regulations, you can sort of bend them. A lot of the times you can stay within the rules and regulations and still do things that are unacceptable. So I would sit down with the office bearer in question and speak to them about why this was firstly done. Then I would consult the other relevant parties, including my executive committee, to come to conclusion as to what steps we'll be taking next. Because even if an OB is not breaking rules and regulations, but is doing something that is overstepping boundaries, we do need to take action against that.
Okay, noted with your answer. Okay, the nature of the Musa president is that of a leader. With your understanding, please elaborate on the qualities that should be exhibited by a leader and the Musa president.
So, as a leader, the Musa president must be fair, he must be just, and he must be understanding. Now, a very important quality that I believe the Musa president should have is to be able to see things in the perspective of a student. Now, before I am Musa president, before I am even a candidate for the position, I'm a student of Monash. So I must be able to see things from their perspective much rather than my own. I should also be able to create an environment whereby my colleagues know how to give and receive criticism in a healthy manner, and they also know when to ask questions and they don't feel hesitant to ask questions. So I must be able to foster a healthy work environment. I must also be understanding and fair and just. Yep, I hope that
Good
answers your
answer.
question.
Yep, that's a good answer. I will just add on to that. I think a few things that you would need to add to that answer is, as I mentioned earlier, a president or specifically a leader needs to have a big picture perspective. Without knowing the big picture, it's impossible to make any decisions that are fair and just. That is a prerequisite. Another thing that a leader should have, especially in a position at the very top, would be a calm mindset. Because if you don't have a calm mindset, it's very easy to make others overreact when when you are the one who should be making sure others are calm in that situation. You also need to be decisive in your decision making. You cannot take your time to make decisions that are important. If, for example, someone asks you to make a decision today, you cannot drag it on to the next week on the same day to answer your decision based on that. And I think another big thing is that you should be one step ahead of others, or at least try your very best to be one step ahead of others when it comes to most Musa affairs. The very last thing that I think I've mentioned to you before is that as a leader, your role is to provide for others, provide the resources that other people need. So that's the biggest, actually, arguably the single biggest tenet as a leader that you should keep. Um, if you cannot provide that resources, you should find someone who can. Otherwise, everything that is reliant on you will grind to a halt, especially when the president is the highest decision making authority and the person who sets the direction for Musa to move forward in the future.
Thank you so much for your insight.
Okay. I think one of the last questions. Earlier, I hear a lot of candidates mention about getting feedback from the student body and touching base with the student body. May I ask how you plan to direct this effort, or how you plan personally to touch base with the student body?
So I think a huge problem right now that we as Musa face is getting low rates of feedback. We aren't necessarily getting feedback from the student body. So every single time new candidates come into office, they put up new feedback forms, new mechanisms, stuff like this. However, I think rather than putting up new forms of feedback and new methods to give feedback, before we do this and before we make new methods, we need to understand why the current methods are not working. People simply do not want to fill these forms anymore. So I would say we need feedback as to why the feedback mechanisms are not working. And this could be done via focus groups and small group discussions, which we could get perspectives of students to actually what they think about Musa. So by making it a focus group, we can actually initiate conversation and we can speak to them right then and there. We wouldn't necessarily need a document from them and give them structured responses based on boxes they ticked or answers they give. I'd say a focus group is extremely effective because we are right there with them to answer their questions right then and there. We are also able to ask them questions and give them more information about what we can and cannot do. And we can get a better idea of why the current feedback mechanisms are not working. Because I do think it's really important that we fix the issues that we currently have. And I think before trying to change it or even bring new things, we need to understand why it's not working. So to do this, we'll be doing more focus groups with students and understanding their perspectives a lot better.
Okay, that's a good answer. Uh, Next, on the topic of administration, being in Musa for about this year, you've already been exposed to the various needs that the organization need, specifically relating to administration. While the other candidates do have most of their points on their manifesto right, what they are trying to fix is a symptom of the root cause and not the root cause itself. So I would like to ask you with regards to administration, which is arguably administrative processes are arguably the biggest issue why Musa is not doing well. What do you intend to do or change regarding the administrative process of Musa to enable others to achieve success within your organization to reach the goals?
So I would say in regards to the administrative processes, you as president of 2022 you've actually laid down the perfect groundwork because you've improved upon a lot of things that should have been improved upon before. So I would say learn from this and understand the current administrative process in detail rather than simply know what it is and then try to change it. We need to understand it in details, consult with the relevant parties that are related to that administrative procedure. For example, if it's finance related, consult with them, or if it's related, consult with the people related to that. So understand it before we try to make any changes. And I do understand that there are a lot of things that we could also improve, but there are also things simply we have to adapt to that which we cannot improve for. So I'd say much rather than put an emphasis on improving the administrative tasks themselves, I want to put an emphasis on making sure my office bearers can cope with what we have right now while we also focus on improving them. Because a big part of it is making sure that OBs understand the processes right now and actually follow them the way they are supposed to be followed, which will result in a lot less delays and a lot less issues. So make sure they adapt to the current situation while also slowly try to bring these improvements. And slowly, I say that because a lot of work does need to be put in, a lot of thinking does go in, a lot of consultation also does go in. So even if we do bring these changes, it's going to be slow. So in the meantime, we must make sure that our OBs can adapt to the processes and also abide by them.
Okay, thank you so much for your response. Okay, I'll be moving on to my very last question now. You mentioned in the election guide that your biggest three priority areas are engagement, organization, and communication. Would you like to elaborate on your answer?
Yep, of course. So I'd say engagement because after the pandemic and after our virtual semesters, we started having physical events. And something that we realized is our participation rates are quite low. I'd say this is because we do have skewed expectations because online events are so much easier for students to attend, so many more students attend them. Whereas in regards to physical events, students actually have to come and they have to make time and they actually have to socialize and interact with people. So our expectations in that regard was kind of skewed. And in terms of publicity, because of the pandemic, we focused largely on online publicity and we haven't really put an emphasis on on-campus publicity. So to address the engagement issue, I think we need to better publicize our efforts and also make sure that we have the correct expectations from the students. Now, my second focus area was organization. I believe it's extremely important to make sure that the internals of Musa are up to par, to make sure that our office bearers do get along with each other quite quite well. Which one am I missing? I've gone through the first
Communication.
two. Could you repeat your question? Yes, communication. So I believe communication sort of does also fall into organization because although Musa is really strong and united, it's nothing without proper communication channels. I believe that Musa 2022 was extremely focused in transitioning themselves from online to offline that we actually forgot to communicate properly with each other. I believe we are making impacts though, and we are on the positive trajectory because we have a group chat in which a lot of office bearers communicate with each other in regards to their own departments and divisions. So I believe building upon these foundations and encouraging better communication is extremely important. By focusing on these three main focus areas, which are engagement, organization, and communication, I think we can improve Musa and also improve the quality of work that we can put out for the students.
Okay, that's a very good answer. What I'd like to add on to your answer is that you are seeing most of the valid points that we need to make for Musa. But the thing I would want to urge you to do is also, and also what to encourage your team to look at is to look at the issue from multiple perspectives and not just the surface level issue like I've seen a lot of candidates doing. You should consider from the three major perspectives, which I've said before, are staff, student, and external. These three are very important because from the staff perspective, they look at our things a certain way. A lot of staff think that we are a student council when in fact we operate like a student union. A student council is one that does things for student council. A student union is one that advocates for things on behalf of the student population. So there's a very distinct difference. From the student side, you've already mentioned a couple of times that we can see things from the student side that is very helpful in understanding where the students are coming from. But it is also important to consider how exactly you plan to communicate information to students. Not everything can be listed out to them, and not always will they understand what we are trying to tell them. So it's very important how you consider the communication that way. And third is external. When I mean external, I mean outside of Monash Uni Malaysia. External can mean whether you refer to outside organizations like who you mentioned before, like other student councils. Your reputation is important, but also how you engage with MUA and all the representatives from Australia, because it's very important as well to see where Musa started from. We are from Australia, the format. Okay, so just these three things to take in mind that I hope that you and your team can consider when you're making decisions as well. I hope to see your team mature as you grow along, assuming you do win the elections. I think that I said all that needs to be said. Musa 2022 has already laid down most of the groundwork. I'm very proud of Musa 2022 and also very hopeful to see what Musa 2023 has in store for us. All the best and good luck for the rest of your campaigning period. You've answered the questions well, in spite of the difficulty. I think we'll hand it back now to the Election Commission for audience Q&A.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Dominic, especially for that wonderful speech. I hope everyone in the audience who was part of Musa 22 is inspired by Dominic's little thank you session. So now let's move on to our next Q&A session, this time by the audience. Alithia, if you could spotlight the first question, I would appreciate that. This one is from Min Hao. So Rashwan, as Musa will consist of a very large group of office bearers, there will be times where various groups within Musa office bearers will establish something similar to friend groups. How will you ensure that when it comes to important decisions, there is no peer pressure from those small groups that influence your decision for Musa matters, especially when it comes to internal conflicts?
All right. Thank you so much, Minhao, for the question. I think it's a very important question. And to answer this question, I actually have to refer back to one of my answers for one of Dom's questions. I have to make sure that I can maintain a work-life balance and make sure I can establish boundaries between them. Because like Minhao said, it is very common for us to develop friend groups within Musa because we work so closely together and we're almost around each other all the time. So because of this, yes, we will develop friend groups. But like I said before, I have to be able to create a distinction between Musa and my personal life. So when it comes to making decisions, I have to solely base them off of facts that are relevant to Musa. Because once elected as president, I'm being elected to represent the best interest of the student population, not the best interest of my friends or myself. I hope that answers your question. Thank you so much, Minha.
Thank you, Rashwan, for your answer. Let's move on to the next question. This time it will be asked from Sandra Sadris. I understand that you are the current movies head, which means that you spearheaded the MCN event that is about to happen soon. There was a lot of backlash in regard to this event. How will you deal with backlash like that in the case that you do become the Musa president? And what will you do to better plan and host events in the future as the Musa president?
All right. Thank you so much, Sandra, for the question. So I do understand that MCN received a lot of backlash, and this was majorly because of the initial price for the event. We did want to make the event as accessible for students as we could, and we definitely tried as hard as we could. But given the budgetary constraints and given where we were, we did have to make sure that we were able to create an event in which the event was successful. If we went under, let's say, the 100 ringgit ticket price, we literally would not have been able to hold the event. So later on, due to some budget reallocations, we were able to reduce that ticket price. So when it comes to dealing with the backlash when I become president, I think I should refer back to how I dealt with it during this term. We need to understand where the students are coming from. Of course, students get upset when a ticket price for an extremely important event is higher. They simply do not know the internals, so I need to understand where they're coming from. And what I will do better is to make sure that we priorly plan for large-scale events and make sure that the budget and the funds required are there at the start. I believe that a lot of these issues came up this time because of the transition phase and because of the focus that we had to put on in making sure that we could transition from online to offline. So having these experiences and making sure that I've learned from them, I do think I'll be able to do much better as Musa president if given the opportunity.
Thank you, Rashwan. Let's move on to the next question. So this one is from Li Jiating. Hi, Rashwan. As a president, you act as a pillar for the rest of the office bearers. In short, the OBs rely on you for answers and solutions to their problems. This means that your job scope extends well over your own, being required to know all ongoings and problems of Musa and being able to solve it. In what ways can you allow us to place our trust in you and allow us to rely on you, knowing that there is always someone that will back us up?
So I do a, okay, there's a continuation. All right. So as president, yes, upon my own job scope, I do need to have a fairly good understanding of the job scope of every single other office bearer. Now, as party leader of Ignivitas, I've stayed up so many nights making sure the manifesto points of my fellow candidates who come from completely different positions make sense. I've also gone through the constitution parts and handbook parts to understand what that job scope is, so I could better explain it to them in ways that they could understand it better. So in terms of making sure that you guys can rely on me, I have a good understanding of the positions and what all of them do. Furthermore, because of my experience in Musa and because of the fact that I work closely with so many members of Musa during this term, I do have a fairly good understanding of how their departments perform. And as president, I have to be somebody that you guys can rely on because as a spokesperson of Musa, I need to be somebody that my OBs can come to when they have questions. Furthermore, I also do have other resources within Musa, such as my executives and such as all the committees, to make sure that when questions arise, we can come up with good answers. I will not be the only one answering these questions because I value multiple opinions and multiple perspectives. So to make sure that the answers we come to are most efficient, I'll make sure that we discuss with the relevant parties in regards to the issue to come up with the best solutions we possibly can. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Rashwan, for your answer. Let's move on to the next question. So this one is also from Shi Minhao. Minhao asks, Rashwan, culture difference can be a challenge when it comes to fostering relationships between staff and students, as it could heavily affect your ease of communication with both parties. Also, given that you're an international student and both parties have a majority of locals, this is also given the fact that MUIS, in which you were the head of last year, has received a lot of backlash from the community in various ways. With this, how would you make sure that these facts, you are still able to maintain this working relationship with them?
Thank you so much for the question again, Minhao. So I do think this is also a really important question. Because we come from different cultures and different places, there could be gaps in our communication. However, Monash is an institution that promotes cultural diversity, inclusivity, and equality. So I believe with these values, we also expect certain staff members of Monash to make sure that they go by these values as well, because these are not simply values that Musa would have to follow. These are values that all members of Monash have to follow because it's from the institution. Now, in terms of the difficulties that could arise because I'm not a local student, I believe that my experience as Moose head has actually prepared me for that because I understand the different ideologies that people have when it comes to the fact that I am not a local. Regardless of where I am from, I do understand you, I understand your struggles because just like you, I am a student from Monash and I do the same work that you do. So regardless from where I'm from, we are the same. And in regards to the backlash and making sure we can have healthy relationships with staff, I am not the person I was yesterday because I've learned from my mistakes. And I believe that staff of Monash are also aware of the fact that people can learn and people can adapt. So I believe that by having a healthy approach to them right at the start, ensuring that they understand that I am no longer the head of Moise, I'm the president of Musa, they should also be able to understand the difference between me from before and me now. So I hope that by starting off on a good foot and making sure that they understand our perspectives as well as we understand their perspectives, we can have a healthy working relationship with the relevant staff members. I hope that answers your question, Minhao.
Thank you, Rashwan. Alithia, do we have other questions? So this one's from Zzz. Since there are two parties contesting, it is very likely the team will have a lot from the opposition. How do you plan to work together in a collaborative and friendly environment?
So I think this is also a very important question because we have so many candidates running for positions this time, and that's something that makes me really proud to see that so many students want these positions and they want to represent the student body. I also do understand that if I am elected and if the other members are elected, there will be people from different different parties in these different positions. I believe this is actually a good strength because we bring different opinions, different visions, and different ideologies to Musa 2023, hence making it a much more diverse student body. Now, I do think there might be some conflict at the start, but as my second manifesto point states, by having more active bonding sessions and activities, we can have a much more healthier work environment, which can actually foster collaboration and a friendly environment. I believe that with the fact that we have such a diverse Musa 2023, we can actually serve the students much better because we'll be able to come up with more creative solutions to problems that we are faced with. I hope that answers your question, ZZZZ.
Thank you, Rashwan, and thank you, ZZZZ, for your question. We also have other questions. So, yeah, this one is also from Shimin Hao and also to Rashwan, of course. Rashwan, from the preparation of candidates with these elections, there are some candidates who have shown a lower quality of preparation and research into their job scope. How will you ensure the departments and divisions next year can perform well, and how will you guarantee that consistency?
So, in terms of candidates from my party, I can guarantee that they are all very, very familiar with their job scopes and their constitutions, because as party leader, I made it so that they would be familiar with this. However, I cannot guarantee this for any independent candidates or any other party members. What I can guarantee, though, is that if elected as Musa 2023, I will ensure that all of the elected candidates and members understand their job scopes and their constitutions within the first week we're elected, not the first week of office, but the first week we're elected. Because I believe going through it and understanding your job is extremely important to do your job right. I think that all candidates at this point must also have done some research into what their jobs are, because in order to make sure they can execute a proper job efficiently next term, they must have some understanding right now so they can learn better during the shadowing period. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Rashwan, for your answer. Let's move on to the next question. This one is from Shi. In the case of unexpected circumstances that harms the name of Musa, how will you ensure that every member of Musa stays within bounds in terms of their social media activities to avoid a public relations crisis?
So I think this is really similar to one of the questions that Dominic asked me. I think when we approach this on a case-by-case basis to try to understand what sort of circumstance it really is. So, like I said before, I'll reiterate again. If a statement must be made as the spokesperson of Musa, I must make a statement. If an apology must be made, I must also make an apology. So when it comes to the specific circumstances that I need to understand which party it mostly relates to. If it's a welfare related issue, I should consult with the Welfare Affairs Committee. It's an education related circumstance, I should go to them. So to really understand how the problem could be solved properly, I should consult with the relevant parties. But also the other part of question, if you could put it up, mentioned that how would I make sure that other Musa members abide by something? Um, stay within bound. So to do this, I should communicate clearly with them the type of behavior and actions that are expected of them during this time, because it's really important that they know how they should act. Because without communication and without any direction given to them, of course they're going to act on their own terms. So I believe that with communication, they can understand better as to what is expected from them as an OB, which will hopefully help us evade a PR crisis. I hope that answers your question, Chi, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Rashwan. Thank you, Chi, for your question. Let's move on to another question, Alithia. So this one is also from ZZZZ. Rashwan, since a lot of international students and country reps are dissatisfied with the current MUIS and its leadership, what do you think qualifies you to be the Musa president? And please be honest.
So, in terms of the issues that Moist this year has faced, I am completely aware of them, and I'm also having ideas for solutions. So, one of the things that was emphasized in the manifesto for the Moist heads from my party is to make sure that the relationship between the CRs and Moist is bridged and making sure that the gap does not exist anymore. I believe that a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of issues and a lot of frustrations faced by country reps regarding Moist is because they don't feel like they're a part of Moist. So to make sure that they feel like a part of Moist, the Moist heads from my party has put in their manifesto that they want to bridge this gap. I believe it's a lot more relevant if you ask them in terms of the ideas they have to solve these issues. But all I can say is that I have learned from my mistakes. I understand that a lot of people aren't satisfied with the way that things were done, which I do realize could have been done better. However, given the circumstances and the fact that we had to start from scratch and also transition from online to offline, I do think we did the best with what we had. However, improvements will be made in the coming future.
Thank you,
I
Rashwan.
hope that answers your question.
All right. We also have another question. This one is from Ina. So Ina asks, Rashwan, considering a large portion of the student population have little to no interest in interacting with Musa, how would you reach out to this part of the student body and diversify Musa's reach?
So I think a large reason as to why some students do not know about Musa is because when the pandemic happened and when we were doing virtual semesters, all of our marketing and promotion was done via social media. So we simply relied on the students that already followed our social media platforms. So I mentioned this before, but I think it's really important for Musa to put the amp up in terms of on-campus publicity. Because the best way to reach Monash students that don't know about Musa is to literally market to them in Monash where they already are. So I believe that with more on-campus publicity, we will be able to reach out to more students that currently do not know about Musa. In addition to that, we can also make sure that new incoming students have a good sense of understanding as to what Musa is, to make sure that coming generations will be aware of what Musa is. Thank you so much, and I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Rashwan. We also have another question. This one is from Jasper Chow. So Jasper asks, every president in the past has made a huge change to Musa to leave a legacy. Will you be aiming to make any big changes to Musa 2023?
I would say, in terms of changes, it's really important we understand that the important thing isn't making a big change, but to make sure that the change you're bringing is actually beneficial to the student community. Sometimes the legacy you leave because you made a big change might not necessarily be good, but sometimes it could also be a great legacy. As mentioned in my manifesto, I do have a couple new ideas that I want to try out for Musa, such as more external collaborations. So I do want to do all of these things, but it's not because I want to leave a big legacy, nor is it because I want to make a big change, but it's more so because I want to improve the service that we already offer to students. So no, I do not have intentions to strictly leave a legacy, but I do have intentions to serve the student body the way we are supposed to, because Musa is elected by the students for the students. I
Thank you,
hope that
Rashwan.
answers your question, Jasper.
Okay, we can move on to the next question as well. This one's from Garen Leong. So Garen asks, understood that Musa is running under student funds, which is regulated by Finance Department. This also limits the flexibility of Musa to execute the operation. How would you expand the operation funds?
So I would say rather than focusing on expanding the operation funds, there are other things you can do to use that money better. The first would be to better utilize the money that we have. And this would be in terms of small scale things. A lot of the times when we have events and initiatives, we buy a lot of things we need for the events. And a lot of times these are small things that we already have in stock at our office. So creating a good inventory system whereby we know the assets that Musa has and stuff that we can use for events could actually help us save a lot more money. So better utilization in a sense does expand the amount of money we can use. Another thing would be to reaching out to sponsors very much more so in advance. A huge thing we realized this year is that the processes of acquiring sponsors, it takes a long time. So making sure that we are aware of the large scale events that would need sponsors at the start would definitely help us get those sponsors in time. Furthermore, by more collaborations with internally in Musa would also help us share the burden of the budget. In addition to that, collaborating with more external parties gives us access to resources that Monash does not have in terms of workshops and also other things that we may not yet know. So I hope by these initiatives and ideas, we are able to utilize our budget properly. In terms of expanding our operation funds, it really does come down to the decision because we can't necessarily ask for more money. All we can do is utilize the money that we're given. I think it was mentioned in the treasurer debate because it was mentioned by the current treasurer that when student life gives us the money, we just have to do what we can with it. So, like what she said, we will simply have to do what we can with it.
Thank you, Rashwan.
I
We
hope
also
that
have
answers your question.
Yes, we also have a follow-up question from Garen. So, a follow-up on the answer: how can you ensure every office bearer to follow up on the system, to follow the system, since every department will have their own budget to run the event and they have their own jurisdiction for it?
I think it's his own justification for it. Oh yeah. So yes, every department will have their own budget, and of course they would justify their own budget. But the system that the whole of Musa follows is the same. So the format of the budget proposals will be the same regardless of your department. EMS will be the same. Everything will be the same. It's all uniform, so it's easier to keep track of, and it's easier to also process. So I'd say, in terms of your question, to make sure, could you put up the question again so I can see it?
Of course.
So yeah, in terms of following the current system that we have, all of these do have to follow the system because if it's not followed, the processes simply won't go through. So in this regard, they simply have to follow the system because that's the only way it will move forward. And they will have their own budget to run the event, and justification is needed for any and all budget that is spent. So I hope this answers your question.
Thank you for your answer, Rashwan. We also have a few words from Dominic that he might like to say regarding the question.
Okay, yeah. Regarding to that question, right, I think you answered very correctly in the sense that first we need to optimize the Musa budget that is given to us. However, it might be within your ability as well to try to lobby for more funding, and this relates to what I asked. What I asked you before about communicating directly with our MUA counterparts. Actually, giving information that I haven't actually told the executive committee yet, that our academic board representative is actually going to discuss this with our Australian counterparts on our behalf, since he's in Australia soon. But it is possible, if anything, that you have any difficulties facing outside of uh, what our current framework and system is, especially within Malaysia, and what you cannot do outside of what is given to us, we can always raise the issue and bring it up and escalate it to our Australian counterparts, especially MSA, to see if they can actually move things on our behalf. Yeah, so just putting that out there as something to note. It is not an impossible thing. It's just very difficult to do. Just like how where a lot of Monash resources are allocated to students, it's just difficult to sometimes meet the criteria to allocate any funding towards whatever you want to do. Okay, yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Dom.
Thank you, Dom, for your input. We can commence with questioning again. Okay, so this one's from Ashley Lim. Ashley asks, provided that many meetings between Musa and the PVC in the past have led to not much changes based on students' feedback, how will you ensure that this time it is different?
I actually disagree that most of the time it is inefficient because I myself was a student who was having major visa issues, I'd say last year, and I brought that up with the current MOS heads at the time, and the issue was actually brought up during the PVC meeting. And because of it, I actually saw the issue get resolved quite fast. So I do think there are some circumstances whereby, yes, the issue may not be resolved, but there are also circumstances in which the issues will be resolved. So when it comes to those that aren't resolved, I think we need to understand as to why that is occurring. Secondly, is there anything that we can do without involving the PVC directly for that problem? Because a lot of the times when the problems do escalate up until that, that necessarily means that solving this issue is sort of outside of our jurisdiction because it requires us to involve the PVC. I'd say how we could make sure these issues are resolved is to firmly communicate with the PVC and make them sort of understand as to why this issue is so crucial and also understand their point of view on the issue because a lot of the times we might see, oh, they aren't solving this problem. Why aren't they solving that problem? We need to understand why it's not being solved and what else can be done to solve that problem. So I hope this answers your question, Ashley.
Thank you, Rashwan, for your answer. We also have a few other questions. So Chi, again, Chi asks, as a president, how do you plan to conduct MSc next year to improve the engagement with the student body?
Thank you, Chi. So I think MSc for the past couple of years has had pretty low attendance from students. And I think a large part of this, before this year at least, was because of how long MSc is. However, this year, due to some work from our Gen Sec, we've actually been able to shorten the time span of MSc by a lot because we do this thing called highlights now, where we read important parts from the business report, but the whole business report is still present. So if one wants to go through the whole report, they can go through it. But for the sake of making the meeting a lot shorter, we decided to go with the highlights. So to make sure that students actually attend MSc, I think it's so important for students to actually understand what MSc is. So often you see Instagram posts reminding students to come to MSc. But what is MSc? Why should they come to MSc? Do they have a say? We should make sure that students are aware that they actually have a say in MSc. It's not simply a meeting for the office bearers to go through their business reports, getting accepted, and then end the session. It's a session whereby we report our business reports to the students and make sure they are aware of what's happening in Musa. So I believe an important thing would be to make sure that we can reignite the passion that students have for MSc and also make sure that we can publicize the MSc information and what MSc is for the newer incoming students. So this could improve the future generations of Monash to come. I hope that answers your question. Thank you so much, Chi.
Thank you, Rashwan, for your answer. We also have other questions. So this one's from Lee Tiating again. Tiating asks, stressing on working relationships and communications with staff, majority of staff are Malay. Hence, local students have an advantage communicating to staff as they are fluent with the language. As the figurehead of Musa and the primary liaison, how do you plan to overcome this barrier?
Thank you so much for this question. So, like I said before, Monash is a university that advocates for more diversity, inclusivity, and equity. So, because of these values, it should be made clear that even if I am an international student, I can have this position. So, in terms of the barriers of communication, I'd say very commonly we all speak in English. English is a language that is understood by so many people, especially in the staff. So when it comes to these communication barriers, I plan to overcome them by simply communicating with them the way I've already been communicating with them because I have been liaising with staff members as a head of division. And so far, I haven't had struggles because I was an international student. But I do understand there will be situations whereby there is a gap in communication because I do not understand Bahasa Melayu. In these sort of situations, I can get help because it's so easy to get somebody that understands the language and can translate that for me. Furthermore, I have HAC and I have my predecessor who is a local who could help me understand what is going on. In addition to that, he also has experience as Musa president, so he could also help me with those issues as well. So the communication barriers, I don't think we'll have so many because we all speak English. when it comes to local language, I can always get help from a third party to understand them better. I hope that answers your question, Lee Jia.
Thank you,
And
Rashwan.
thank you so much.
It seems like we have the last question for this Q&A session, unless some other questions arise. This one is from Mahasan. We are seeing her. Mahasan asks, will you take responsibility for the backlash that Muis is getting this year as the leader? And how would you try to make it better when you lead Musa so that it would not get backlash?
All right, so because this is being brought up quite often about the backlash that Moise has faced, I take responsibility for it, and I will take accountability for it. As the head of division, this is something I must do. So I do take responsibility for it, and I do acknowledge that I could have done better. But I do also put an emphasis on the fact that I have learned. As the Monash saying goes, Ancora Imparo, I'm still learning. So could you display the question again so I can answer the second part?
Of course.
So in terms of how I would try to make it better when I lead Musa, like I've said before, I've understood what's gone wrong. I understand the areas which need improvement. So I will be improving these areas. I do think that Musa, regardless of what we do, will get backlash because we always do get backlash. So in terms of that, I don't think we can guarantee that Musa is not going to get backlash because there's always going to be opinions that contradict with our own, resulting in backlash for us. This isn't simply because we do things wrong. There are a lot of situations whereby students misunderstand what we're trying to do and then we receive backlash. So I do take responsibility for any backlash that Moise has received. As division leader and division head, this is my job. So to make it better, I'll make sure that I learn from these mistakes and I can apply the lessons that I've learned as Musa president. However, I cannot guarantee that we will not get backlash, but I can guarantee that if I have to take responsibility for it, I will. And if it needs to be addressed, I will address it. And if an apology needs to be made, I will make that apology. I hope that answers your question, Mahasan.
Thank you, Rashwan. It seems like these are all the questions we have for your debate. And I'm glad to say that everyone was very enthusiastic about asking you questions. Before we move on to our closing statement, would Dominic have anything that he would like to say before we end?
Sure. Okay. Well, this is closing towards the end of the elections for this year already. We've seen Musa 2022, and the audience will judge on the performance of all the candidates from both parties and all the independents so far. I think that it's been a very insightful journey into these candidates who have volunteered per se for the positions that they are running for, and I think that this will be a very interesting voting period to come. Just want to wish all the candidates good luck and all the best for the next steps in your election, and also for those who are elected, please look forward to shadowing your predecessor as well as intensive training regime if we can have the time for it. But outside of that, thank you so much to the Election Commission for putting in all the effort these last 2 or 3 months. And thank you for all the candidates who have joined the debates and answered the questions by students. Your response is very much appreciated. And also thank you to Musa 2022 for providing all the resources that was provided to the candidates as well as to the student body. I'll just leave it at here. Good luck to all the candidates once again, and thank you. I'll be signing off as the last President's Debate for 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic. Rashwan, without further ado, it is now your time to end with your closing statement. So, by all means, take it away.
All right. So I would like to take this opportunity to firstly thank Sean and Alethea for the hard work that they put in as members of the Election Commission, and also the other members of the Election Commission. I also show gratitude to the current Musa President Dominic for attending this debate and also offering his insightful ideas, which I will carry with me moving forward. Lastly, but most importantly, I would like to thank the audience members of students for attending this event. If elected, I will be elected by the students for the students. Your support and your feedback is the key in improving Musa. I believe that without the students, Musa simply ceases to exist. If I am elected, I will ensure that my manifesto points are executed, and I will be doing so in a just and fair manner. Now, to make things not too much longer, I would like to conclude, and I would like to make a quote but a slightly edited version of it, and the quote is by JFK. Ask not what the students can do for you, but what you can do for the students. Thank you so much, and I will give it back to Sean.
Thank you, Rashwan, once again. Thank you for adding on that very inspirational quote to close off with your speech. The Election Commission would also like to thank everyone who has been participating in our debates from beginning to finish, regardless of how big or small a role you played in it. Thank you so much for asking your questions, guys. Especially thank you for keeping comments civil this time. I have to say, I was honestly kind of expecting a little bit of drama, considering that this is our presidential debate, but I'm glad to say that there was not much today. This was the debate for our president's position with our office bearer Dominic Lee and our candidate Ali Rashwan Muhammad from Ignivitas. We don't have any next debates because this was our last debate. Again, thank you everyone for tuning in for all our debates. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for supplying us with your questions. For any other election updates, we have our Discord server, we have Musa Instagram, we have our Musa website, and we also have our election guide for manifestos. Thank you so much for tuning in.